Module 2. The effects of bending of rocks along faults and how movements along faults generate earthquakes. Lesson 1. Effect of bending of rocks along faults. First expectation. Describe the effects of bending of rocks along faults. Number 2. Define the important terms related to earthquakes. You may use separate sheet of paper. You may write true or false once a statement is stated. Earthquake is a natural hazard. Number 2. Strike-slip fault is caused by tensional stress. Number 3. Earthquake drill is needed to raise awareness and prepare students to respond and evacuate efficiently. Let's start the lesson. Rocks at the edges of tectonic plates are subject to tremendous forces, resulting in intense deformation. The force per unit area acting on a rock is called stress. The three types of directional stress experienced by rocks are called compressional, tensional, and shear stress. If the stress is large enough, rocks undergo deformation, change of shape, or volume. The amount of deformation experienced by a rock is called strain. The behavior of rock in response to stress can be elastic, brittle, or ductile. A rock behaves in an elastic manner when it recovers its original shape after the stress is removed. When the stress exceeds a value called the rock strength, the rock experiences a permanent deformation. The deformation can be either brittle, in which case the rock breaks, producing a fracture called fault, or ductile, in which case the rock is deformed without breaking. An example of ductile deformation is a fold. This is an example of ductile deformation, wherein rocks did not break. The deformation can be either brittle, in which case the rock breaks, producing a fracture called fault. Note that the rock may be first folded and then fractured as stress increases. What is elastic rebound theory? This was proposed by Henry Fielding Reed. Prior to a rupture event producing an earthquake, a body of rock experiences a certain amount of elastic deformation during which energy is stored. Once the stress applied to the rock exceeds the rock's strength, rupture occurs along fault plane, and the rocks on both sides of the fault slip past each other and recover the original shape. During rupture event, strain energy is released in the form of frictional, heat, and seismic waves. The slipping motion of two blocks starts at a point called focus of the earthquake. After rupture event, stress build-up resumes until the next earthquake occurs. This is where the earthquake starts. This is before earthquake, and this is after earthquake. The ground before bending of rocks. The ground is bending, storing energy. The rock snaps, strengthen out, and vibrate. How movements along faults generate earthquakes using models. Expectations. Simulate how movements along faults generate earthquake using models. Explain how movements of rocks generate earthquakes. The earth has four major layers: inner core, outer core, mantle, and crust. The crust and the top of the mantle make up the outermost layer on the earth. But this layer is not all in one piece. It is made up of many pieces like puzzle covering the surface of the earth. Not only that, but these puzzle pieces keep slowly moving around, sliding past one another and bumping into each other. We call these puzzle pieces tectonic plates, and the edges of the plates are called the plate boundaries. The plate boundaries are made up of faults, and most of the earthquakes around the world occur on these faults. Since the edges of the plates are rough, they get stuck while the rest of the plate keeps moving. Finally, when the plate has moved far enough, the edges unstick on one of the faults and there is an earthquake. Seismic activity. The forces that move plates create stresses within the Earth's crust and can cause the crust to suddenly fracture. Plate tectonics also explains how earthquakes happen as a release of stress on rocks. The area of the contact between the two fractured crustal masses is called fault. Earthquakes result from sudden movements along faults, creating release of energy. Movements along the fault can be horizontal, vertical, or both. These are an example of earthquakes. For us to be safe, follow these 7 safety tips before and after big quake. Number 1. Make a plan to keep your family safe. Number 2. Have an emergency kit ready to go. Number 3. Learn how to use your home's fuse and breaker boxes. Number 4. Stop, drop, cover, and hold during an earthquake. Number 5. Drive cautiously and stop at all intersections. Number 6. Always assume downed power lines are energized and dangerous. Lastly, if you see any downed power lines, stay away and call 911 or 117. Concept to remember. The amount of deformation experienced by a rock is called strain. The behavior of rock in response to stress can be elastic, brittle, or ductile. The deformation can be either brittle, in which case the rock breaks, producing a fracture called fault. A deformation in which case the rock is deformed without breaking is called fold. Rocks get bent in an elastic fashion until they reach their limit. They can break in brittle fashion. The rocks on either side of the break act like a rubber bands and snap back in their original shape. The snap is an earthquake. Not all faults generate earthquakes. Too much stress can cause faults to slip and produces earthquakes. Rocks get bent in an elastic fashion until they reach their limit, then they break in brittle fashion. The rocks on either side of the break act like a rubber bands and snap back to their original shape. The snap is an earthquake. Earthquakes. Shaking of the ground caused by sudden movements of large blocks of rock along fault. Fault is a fracture or break in Earth's lithosphere along with blocks of rock move past each other. Magnitude. The size of earthquake is called magnitude. The Richter magnitude scale measures the amount of seismic energy released by an earthquake. Intensity. The severity of earthquake shaking is assessed using descriptive scale, the modified Mercalli intensity scale. Hope you enjoy learning. Consider